بینندگان گرامی، به برنامه افغانستان به روایت افغانها خوش آمدید. هدف این برنامه معرفی هنرمندان و متفکرین افغان به جامعه جهانی است تا بتوانیم بحثی که درباره امور کشور ما و مردم ما میشه معرفش خود ما باشیم. برنامه ما به زبان انگلیسی است و صحبت با هر مهمان در مورد یک مطلب مختلف. امید است که این برنامه ها را با جوان ها هم شما در میان بگذارید تا باعث تشویقشان شود و آنها هم در این بحث ها اشتراک کنند. بنده میثاق کاظمی هستم، یک فیلمساز متولد کابل و فعلا مقیم کالیفرنیا. تشکر و از قصه مهمان امروز ما لذت ببرید.
Hello, everyone. Thank you and welcome once again to another conversation with another amazing Afghan in the diaspora, in this case, Afghan Canadian based out of Vancouver. Today, I'll be speaking with Raila Naibzada, who got her PhD in British Columbia in education and has written her first, or she considers it first, but it's kind of almost like her second novel, which I had the pleasure of reading a few pages of, and it is fascinating. So we're going to talk about her writing, her background, just to get to know her, introduce you to another amazing Afghan. So I'm very excited to start with you, Raila Jan, as to how did your family and yourself get to where you are right now in Canada? What's you guys' journey story?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I came to Canada when I was 2 years old. My parents, they're from Afghanistan, but they met in Iran. Both of my parents fled Afghanistan during the Soviet invasion. And they met in Iran and they got married. And immediately when they got married, my father tried to get us to come to Canada as refugees. Mm-hmm. And I've been in Canada for most of my life. I grew up here.
Nice. Where around Canada did you grow up?
Well, I spent immediately when we came to Canada, we were first in Alberta, and we lived there for quite a few years, and then we moved to BC.
Okay, that's wonderful. And what inspired you? I was going to say to the audience that we may hear kids in the background. That's
I'm sorry.
No, that would be great. That's a special soundtrack we've added. You know.
Yes.
From your two wonderful kids. Before we get into books and all of that, like what was going through your mind when you were trying to go through school? You know, as a person of Afghan background, how was that experience growing up for you?
It was good. I did face maybe not in my university years, but when I was a lot younger, when I first came to Canada, especially, there wasn't a big Afghan community, a big population, and I was kind of picked on a lot. I did face a lot of racism, and people had no idea about Afghanistan at all. They didn't even know it was a country, and I grew up being called Paki my entire life. Like they just assumed I was from Pakistan. So I had those kind of derogatory racist terms thrown at me, and also my mom and my sister wear the hijab, and I actually wore the hijab for a year too. And during that year, I felt a lot of discrimination. But now I have my family. They're very Muslim and they wear the hijab, and it comes with a lot of hatred. You know what I mean?
Right. What years did you wear the hijab from until?
I wore the hijab, I believe, in the year 2000. It was right when.
How old were you? Or maybe I shouldn't ask your age.
Oh, no, I don't mind. I was in grade 11. I was in high school. And it was just right. It was right around the time of 9/11 when I wore it.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, and I was just, it wasn't for me, you know, it wasn't for me.
Okay.
And I worked for a year, and then I ended up taking it off.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure through growing up, you mean as any human being, we go through multiple identities, discovery, self-discovery, and all of that. And that gets to kind of my next question is, at what point did you decide you wanted to go into education and writing, and how did all of this begin? Where's the inspiration behind the field that you chose to go into?
I've wanted to be a writer my entire life. It's actually quite funny because I wanted to be a scriptwriter more than anything. And I wrote my first script. I'll never forget this. I wrote my first script in grade 8. And when I wrote it, I showed it to my drama teacher. And it was so funny because I made him sign a contract saying he's not to steal my ideas. So I was very, you know, I was very like ambitious, and I've always wanted to pursue writing. But growing up in an Afghan household, my parents, they kept saying that I should pursue something else, and that writing should be a hobby, and especially script writing. So what I did is I studied English. I got my degree in English, and once again, my parents weren't very pleased with that because I have my older sister and my brother, they're nurses. And then I have a younger sister who's in social work. And for my parents, it was like, well, what are you going to do with English? What are you going to do? And I'm like, okay, teach it. So I always pursued English and teaching, and which is why I got my teaching degree and my PhD degree. And then I had kids. And while I had kids, then I realized that, you know what? I want to stay home and be an at-home mom and finally pursue my writing. Mm-hmm. Like, it may not, you know, like for the longest time, I was trying to please everyone else. But now I'm like, no, I want to focus on my writing. And I wish I went to school, and I did film school and creative writing. Like, I wish I did all that. But it's never too late, right?
Yeah. Don't worry, you didn't miss much. I went to film school. It's all good. You have what you have written is a lot better than what most people who can get a degree in film would write. Believe me. Your quality of writing is definitely at a different stage, and you didn't miss much. But at what point did you decide? You mentioned, you know, kind of becoming a mother and all that. The idea for your Monster Child, the book we're going to talk about, at what point did this kind of come about?
Well, when I've had the idea of Monster Child for 10 years now. Okay. Eventually, when I first came up with the idea, it was supposed to be a fantasy novel. And I tried several times, and then I realized that, you know what, fantasy isn't a genre for me. So I'm just going to leave it alone. And then while I did my teaching degree, I was teaching the Jade Peony to grade 10 English students. And that's when it just like hit me and occurred to me that, you know what, this novel has impacted me so much. I'm going to write something similar like that, but with Afghan voices. And that's when I actually started to really write Monster Child. I always had the title. The title was there 10 years ago. And then I finally wrote it, and this was probably like 4 or 5 years ago. And I wrote multiple revisions, like it kept changing, but that's when it actually occurred to me.
Right. Yeah. The style that you have utilized, of course, I think in film you kind of call it magic realism. In book, do you call it the same as well? Kind of what you're incorporating. Yeah. What is the genre you would say of what you're using?
Some would call it magic realism. Some would call it fabulism. Okay. For me, I didn't focus so much on trying to make it like that, like Shabnam Cries Tears of Blood. Right. I wrote it like as if it was almost real. Like, I didn't focus on it fitting a genre, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it is incorporate, and it is very important to the book. It has to do with like the monstrosity. Sorry, go ahead.
Right. No, you cut off when you were actually explaining the magic realism element of this book, and I want you to say it one more time. What exactly is the magic realism with one of the characters?
Right.
If you could repeat that and kind of maybe even talk about the background of where that comes from.
Sure. So, yeah, some would categorize my book as fabulism, some magic realism. The magical element in Monster Child is that one of the characters, Shabnam, she cries blood. And when I wrote it, I didn't want Monster Child to be categorized as fabulism. I wrote it thinking that it was something real. And the reason why I felt it to be real that Shabnam was crying blood is because I had to do with my own trauma as a child. When I was 10 years old, my youngest brother got into a car accident, and ever since then, like I would see blood. It was just part of this trauma I had, and I don't know how you feel about this, but I think our culture, our Afghan culture, we don't really take mental health seriously.
Mm-hmm.
So I was never taken to therapy or anything to kind of deal with my trauma. I was told that I just have to deal with it, get over it. And that just like stuck with me. So whenever any kid turns 5, like my own child just turned 5, it's very hard for me because when I see them anywhere near a car, I just see blood. I don't know why. I see them covered in blood. It's part of this trauma I have. And so that's where the idea came from, with Shabnam crying blood. Yeah, it's a lot to take in.
And yes, no, beautifully put. And I'm going to come back to it, but I want to give like a 1-minute synopsis of the book. I'm going to give it a try if I leave anything out, just for the audience so they know what your whole book is about. From what I read was basically the story of these migrant kids, 3 siblings, Aleph, Bey, and Shabnam, who are being raised in Canada, in this family that is, somewhat functional, somewhat not, migrant Afghan family. And you kind of bring the stories of Afghan culture and Afghan identity, and then mix it with, living in Canada. I didn't quite get like which area, what sort of was a suburban city, where it was, but anything else you want to talk about the book that I don't know if I did a good job, but.
Oh no, you did a great job. It's located, the novel's set in Vancouver, and it's based around Bey's story. Bey is 13 years old, and she gets sexually assaulted by her cousin Amir. And after that, a bunch of family secrets are revealed. And in doing all that, the kids try to deal with themselves because each child sees themselves as a monster. So it has to do with the kids coming to terms with all the trauma and the family secrets that have haunted them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. And it opens so beautiful cinematically too, with the whole Qurbani, I believe it's one of during the Eid, one of the holidays where a goat is chosen and sacrificed, and very cinematic. Now I can see why the screenwriting element kind of came through, because it was a very cinematic moment where she's woken up early in the morning, taken out to go and do one of this sacrifice, which is a very beautiful holiday in Afghanistan, but it involves killing a goat, and eating it, and making that delicious meal out of it. I'm vegetarian, by the way, so I haven't eaten a very long time.
It was probably very difficult for you to read that. I know.
But I had a little. My little nephew went to Afghanistan, and he was a little kid, and he basically, that's a good story in itself. He basically grew. There was a goat they had, and he didn't know that this goat was going to be sacrificed. So he became friends with the goat,
Oh, no.
and he was young. I'm trying to think, when we under 5, and he became friends with this goat and everything because the goat was just around the house, and then one day they killed the goat and eat it, and poor kid is traumatized, and he didn't eat. I don't think he was having meat for a long time.
Actually, when we first came to Canada in Alberta, there were no halal shops. There was none of that. So we would have to go to farms and actually butcher our own animals. So that entire chapter is kind of my experience seeing that happen. Like my father would take us to those farms and we'd witness it. And it was like, it was, my parents didn't think it was a big deal, but I was a kid. Like, it was very traumatizing for me, and it's something I can never forget, right?
Yeah, and you start the book right with it. Yeah.
Yes.
I'm hoping that people read your book, definitely, because there's so much in it. I'm more interested in you as a character, you know, and kind of exploring what went behind the book. And you kind of mentioned mental health as an element. Obviously, we know that culturally mental health is not spoken as much. It's very common in many cultures, you know, and even in Western culture, mental health is not something that's, like I was looking at a statistic, you know, now, right, I think it's the Men's Mental Health Week or month going on, and I was looking that 75% of men, of those who commit suicide, 75% are men. So it's not as commonly spoken about either. But I wanted to kind of get into, what does mental health kind of look like right now when it comes to what is happening in Afghanistan and around the world for you as an Afghan in the diaspora? How are you processing that?
Yes, well, actually, I have family right now in Afghanistan. My cousin, I speak to him almost every day, and just to see if he's alive. I have family in Kabul and in Herat right now, and it's so heartbreaking what's going on. And I'm doing my best to raise awareness and educate people and get people to donate, because right now there's a humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan, and it's just so heartbreaking. It's so heartbreaking. My cousin has been speaking about, you know, feelings and thoughts of suicide, and it's just really hard to listen to, right. But I need to be there for him, right? And I think, and even for me myself, like, writing is a form of therapy for me. And so it's helping me with my own mental health issues, because I battle with it all the time. Right.
Through this book, when you were writing it, did you feel there was a shift in your mental health, having had the opportunity to actually bring a lot of this out on paper?
Well, I don't know. At times, like, you get so like deeply involved with the characters. I didn't know if it was doing me any good, or, like, there were times where I felt it was doing me more harm, because it was just, everyone who read Monster Child, they're like, this is such a depressing novel. It is so depressing. And so that's what I felt too. I'm like, is this helping me? Is this making me feel more depressed?
Right. Yeah. Definitely the content is very, very heavy. That's definitely for sure.
Yes.
But I felt as I was reading it, kind of, I think your creativity of being able to tell it in such a dramatic and a story way, in a way kind of helps the audience be both with characters and also detach themselves from it, and be able to read it as a story. That's at least how, that was my experience, you know, reading it. It's such a captivating story that you kind of get involved, you go through it. It has some bad, you know, horrific events happening in it, but I think you kind of do come out of it touched in a way, with your writing. And for, you know, kind of a little bit more on the writing and that element of it, where did you kind of tap into this sort of creative writing? Have you written other things before, poems or anything of that nature? Because I thought it was very creative. So
Right.
I'm sure that wasn't something you learned in your PhD in education, or maybe you did.
No, I've always just been interested in, like, I've always had a passion for writing. I've always written short stories. I never had any formal training in creative writing. I tried my best to read and learn from other authors. And I actually wrote the first manuscript of Monster Child during my PhD. So that helped. And I just write whenever I can. And currently I'm in the process of trying to turn Monster Child into a trilogy. So, yeah. So I'm just doing my best to improve and learn from other writers.
Right. Yeah, and speaking of trilogy, I wanted to ask on that, how did the process from getting it written to the publication go? What was that process like for you, and how did you go about it?
It was so difficult. When I first was sending it out, no one was interested until Donald Trump placed a Muslim ban. And then there was a call out for Muslim authors. Publishers and agents were looking to represent and publish work from Muslims. So then all of a sudden, I had so many publishers wanting to read Monster Child. And it was just, it was kind of heartbreaking because it had to take that for our voices to matter. And then it just became easy after that for me. Like, publishers were wanting it, and I was actually in a position where I got to choose which publisher I wanted to publish my work, and that's never happened to me before. Yeah,
that's wonderful. And now you want to turn it into a trilogy, right? You said, tell us a little bit about that. What are you thinking? Which characters are you expanding, or are you going back into more stories? What is it what are the next two books?
Well, the ending. Once when you get to the ending, I have a lot of my readers kind of like, what just happened here? Like, this is not the ending we were looking for. So the trilogy is kind of based on the family and what happens after the big family secret is revealed. And also it kind of goes back to Afghanistan. The story in part 2, I want to kind of look into what the parents of Shabnam and Alif and Bay, how they met and their struggles before coming to Canada. So that's what I want to look into for the trilogy. Yeah,
that's wonderful. Just expanding the characters' backstory.
Yes.
Okay, that's wonderful. And is that something you're writing right now, or something you're thinking?
The second
what
book.
What stage are you in?
I've completed the second book, and the third book right now. I'm just kind of thinking of ideas. I haven't started writing it, but I also wrote a fantasy novel, and I'm very excited about that because that has to do with like borders and it's just very relevant to what's happening today with Afghanistan and the refugees. That I'm very excited about too. But nothing, I have no idea about that. Like so far it hasn't been picked up by any publishers right now.
I'm sure it will. I hope, and I'm sure it will be picked up. It's following the success of your current book. I wanted to understand a little bit more, kind of, in your opinion, what do you think is you're an author, you write, what is the contribution or voice of an Afghan when it comes to literature and writing? What do you think is so unique about the Afghan voice that needs to be heard?
Well, I've always had trouble when non-Afghans write Afghan stories. I feel like they're our stories. Only we should be writing about it. And I'm, you know, I'm very privileged. I live here. I'm not in Afghanistan. So I can't write the way an Afghan person, like an Afghan woman would be writing right now in Afghanistan, what she's going through. But for me, it's always been important to me that I not just be seen as an author, but an Afghan author. That's been very important to me. And in my writing, I don't want to write characters that someone will read and be like, oh, okay, aside from their names, this sounds like a total white family. Like for me, it's very important that the culture and the language and all of that is incorporated into my writing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Of course, and you do that brilliantly in this book. And
Thank you.
You mentioned a little bit about Afghans being able to tell their own stories, and that's been one of the main problems and difficulties I've seen, is that everybody's writing about us other than our own selves. So you must have had a lot of other people who are in your position who want to write, who want to tell their own stories. What do you have to say to them? How could they go from, because a lot of it is they may not feel that the confidence or whatever it takes to actually pick up the pen and write. What was your journey, right? What can you tell them from your journey about writing, if they're thinking about it, that, oh, I have a story to tell? What do you have to share with them?
I would say just to continue writing. Write for yourself. Don't try to write for an audience. First, you have to enjoy writing before you try to, I guess, market your writing to publishers and agents. And read as much as you can. Read work from your own people and use that to kind of inspire you. And I really can't add much because I don't feel like I'm in a position to give such advice because this is my first book. But I really want to support my people, and I really hope that our voices are heard and that we continue to share our voices. That's just something I really hope for.
Right. No, I think you are qualified. You have written a book. It's published. It's good to go. And you mentioned some books that they should be reading. What are some Afghan authors or Afghan voices that you would like to recommend people reading and digging into?
Well, I'd say Khalid Hosseini. Everyone knows Khalid Hosseini. I also think Nemat Sadat is great, the carpet weaver. And that's something else that our culture doesn't really give space to, the LGBT community in Afghanistan, and Nemat Sadat is perfect for that. And also there's another author who I really love. She's not Afghan, but she's Muslim, Uzma Jalaluddin. She's author of Hannah Khan Carries On and Aisha at Last, and her books are being turned into films. And I think she's just great because her writing, she doesn't reinforce stereotypes at all. And she writes romance, and she writes it in such a fun, loving way. So those are my three authors that I can think of right now from the top of my head. But there's a lot of great work out there. There's a lot of
right. And these are in English. Of course, in Persian and Pashto, there's so much written by Afghans.
Oh, of course.
Volumes and volumes. Yeah.
Right,
some translated, many not yet translated.
Yes.
Yeah, which I'm sure if those who have access to the language can tap into that. But yeah, that was a great suggestion. To conclude, I wanted to ask any other thoughts that you may have, and also where can people find your book?
My book is available on my publisher's website, Will Second Win, and they can also access it. They're in libraries right now, and it's available on Amazon, eBay. It's just available online. And the last thing I'd like to say is for my Afghan people, especially the people in Afghanistan, I know you're going through a lot, and I just hope that our stories don't get buried right now, because Afghanistan needs us now more than ever.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
And with that, yes, it was wonderful having you and speaking with you, Raila John, and best of luck with your continuous endeavors and other books, and hopefully we get to read more from you.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day. Okay.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.